Chapter 4: The Mice. The most uncomfortable part of the story is not the farmer. It is not the dead pig. It is not even the well. The most uncomfortable part of the story is the mice. Because the mice force us to ask a question most people do not want to ask. What can pressure turn us into? It is easy to look at the mice and judge them. We can say they became cruel. We can say they became violent. We can say they became beasts. We can say they lost their nature. But before we judge them too quickly, we must remember something. They did not enter the well as cannibals. They entered as hungry creatures looking for food. They did not begin by eating one another. They began by eating what had been placed before them. Their tragedy was not that they were born monsters. Their tragedy was that they were placed in conditions where monstrosity became useful. This is where the story becomes human. Because history shows us again and again that ordinary people can be transformed by pressure. Not always, not completely, not without choice, but enough to make us humble. A peaceful person can become suspicious. A generous person can become defensive. A wounded person can become dangerous. A humiliated person can become hungry for revenge. A frightened person can become obedient to cruelty. A poor person can be made to hate another poor person. A victim can be trained to become an instrument of the same system that wounded them. This does not mean human beings have no responsibility. They do. Every person is still responsible for what they do with their pain. But if we want wisdom, we must examine both the person and the pressure. We must ask not only what did they do, we must also ask what environment shaped them. This is where Thomas Hobbes becomes useful. In Leviathan, Hobbes wrote about the condition of human beings when there is no security, no trust, and no authority strong enough to protect them. He described a world where fear rules, where every person must suspect every other person, where survival becomes uncertain, and where life can become solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Hobbes was not describing mice in a well, but he understood something about fear. When people do not feel safe, they do not think like people at peace. When people believe tomorrow is threatened, they become more willing to strike today. When people believe that another person's survival may mean their own destruction, suspicion becomes reasonable. And when suspicion becomes reasonable, cruelty can begin to disguise itself as self-defense. Inside the well, every mouse becomes a possible threat, not because every mouse is evil, but because the structure has made every mouse dangerous to every other mouse. This is one of the deepest lessons of the trap. A bad system can make fear look intelligent. It can make trust look foolish. It can make cooperation look risky. It can make violence look practical. It can make betrayal look like preparation. It can make selfishness look like wisdom. People inside such systems may not say, "I am becoming cruel." They may say, "I am being realistic." They may say, "This is how life works." They may say, "If I do not do it first, they will do it to me." They may say, "Only the strong survive." These sentences are dangerous because they often sound mature. But sometimes they are not maturity. Sometimes they are the language of a person who has adapted too well to a sick environment. René Girard helps us go even deeper. Girard argued that human beings are imitative creatures. We do not only desire things directly, we often learn what to desire by watching others. One person wants something, another person sees that desire, and soon the object becomes more valuable because others want it too. This is what Girard called mimetic desire. At first, imitation helps human beings learn. But under scarcity, imitation becomes rivalry. If we both desire the same object, and if the object cannot be shared, then you become an obstacle to me. You are no longer simply another person. You become the person standing between me and what I believe I need. Inside the well, this is exactly what happens. The first object of desire is the pig. The mice gather around it. They compete for it. But when the pig is gone, desire shifts. Now the object is survival itself. And because survival seems limited, every other mouse becomes a rival. Girard's theory helps us understand why groups under pressure often search for a victim. When tension rises, when fear spreads, when rivalry becomes unbearable, a community may release its violence onto one person or one group. The group tells itself they are the problem. If we remove them, peace will return. This is scapegoating. The scapegoat is not always innocent in every way. But the scapegoat is made to carry more blame than it deserves. The group places its fear, anger, and disorder onto a target. Then, by attacking that target, the group feels temporarily united. This is one reason divided societies can become so dangerous. People do not always attack the true source of suffering. They attack the target that has been made to represent their suffering. A poor citizen may be told that another tribe is the reason for his poverty. A struggling worker may be told that another employee is the reason for his insecurity. A frustrated young person may be told that another class, gender, religion, or immigrant group is the reason for his humiliation. A community may be told that one family, one race, one political group, or one outsider is the source of all decay. This is the scapegoat mechanism. It simplifies pain. It gives confusion a face. It gives fear a body. It gives the crowd someone to attack. And for a moment, attacking that target feels like justice. But it is not always justice. Sometimes it is redirected suffering. Sometimes it is the well hiding behind the body of another mouse. This is why Girard is so important to our subject. He helps us see that human beings under pressure do not only compete for resources, they also compete for innocence. Everyone wants to say, "I am not the cause, they are the cause." The problem is not the system. The problem is that group. The problem is that person. The problem is that enemy. And once the enemy is named, thinking can stop. That is what the farmer wants. He does not want the mice to understand the structure. He wants them to find a target quickly, because a target is easier to attack than a system. A person can be hated more easily than a structure can be understood. This is why George Orwell remains useful. In 1984, Orwell shows a society where people's anger is not removed but managed. The regime gives citizens an enemy to hate. Their frustration is directed outward. Their emotion is organized. Their hatred becomes a ritual. The genius of this kind of control is that it does not deny people's anger. It uses it. A system does not always need peaceful citizens. Sometimes it needs angry citizens whose anger has been pointed in the wrong direction. This is what happens in many wells. People are not emotionless. They are full of emotion. They are angry. They are tired. They are humiliated. They are afraid. They feel something is wrong. But instead of being guided toward clarity, they are guided toward a convenient enemy. The mice feel hunger, but they do not understand the farmer, so they attack each other. This is also why Muzafer Sherif's robber's cave experiment matters. In that study, boys at a camp were separated into groups. The groups developed identities. Then they were placed into competition. The competition produced hostility. The boys insulted each other, fought each other, and began to see the other group as enemies. But when the researchers introduced problems that required both groups to cooperate, goals that neither group could achieve alone, hostility reduced. This is one of the most important lessons for our theme. Conflict can be created by the structure of competition, but conflict can also be reduced by the structure of cooperation. The boys did not need to be born enemies. The environment helped produce the enemy. Then a different environment helped reduce the hatred. This gives us hope. If people can be shaped by a trap, they can also be reshaped by a better structure. If competition can create hostility, shared purpose can create trust. If scarcity can produce fear, cooperation can produce a way out. This is why the chapter is called The Mice, Not the Monsters. Because if we call them monsters, we stop thinking. We place them outside ourselves. We say, "That is not me." But the more honest response is, under enough pressure, what might I become? Viktor Frankl is important here. Frankl survived Nazi concentration camps and wrote deeply about human freedom under suffering. His great insight was not that suffering is good. Suffering can be terrible, humiliating, and destructive. But Frankl argued that even under extreme conditions, a person still has a final inner freedom. The freedom to choose one's attitude, one's moral stance, one's response. This is where Frankl corrects a dangerous misunderstanding. If we only study pressure, we may begin to excuse everything. We may say, the mice had no choice. The system made them do it. The environment is responsible. But Frankl reminds us that even when the environment is powerful, human beings are not only products of the environment. There remains a space, even if small, between what happens to us and what we become. This is a hard truth. It is also a hopeful truth. Because if people have no choice, then freedom is impossible. But if people have some choice, even under pressure, then dignity is still possible. The well may explain the mice, but it does not fully excuse them. The trap may shape the person, but it does not completely own the soul. This is the tension we must hold carefully. On one side, we must not be naive. Systems matter, scarcity matters, fear matters, propaganda matters, humiliation matters, trauma matters. People can be pushed, conditioned, manipulated, and deformed by the worlds they inhabit. But on the other side, we must not remove responsibility. People still choose. Some choose cruelty, some choose silence, some choose betrayal, some choose courage. Some choose to protect the weak even when it costs them. Some choose to refuse the false enemy. Some choose to ask who built the well. Some choose not to become the last mouse. This is what makes human beings tragic and magnificent at the same time. We can be shaped by pressure, but we can also resist the meaning pressure tries to give us. The farmer may create the well, but he cannot fully decide who we become inside it unless we surrender the inner ground completely. That is why some people leave suffering with compassion. Others leave with cruelty. Some people are wounded and become healers. Others are wounded and become predators. Some people experience betrayal and become more careful, but still humane. Others experience betrayal and decide to betray first forever. Some people survive poverty and become generous. Others survive poverty and despise the poor. Some people are humiliated and later protect the dignity of others. Others are humiliated and spend their lives humiliating others. The same fire can harden clay and melt wax. The difference is not only the fire, it is also the material, the meaning, the choices, the community, the faith, the memory, and the courage inside the person. This is why we must study the mice with compassion and seriousness. They are victims of the trap, but they can also become agents of harm. They are shaped by the well, but they can also reproduce the well. They suffer, but they can also make others suffer. They deserve understanding. But understanding is not the same as excusing. A mature society must learn to do both, understand the roots of destructive behavior, and still hold people accountable for destruction. If we only punish, we may never change the conditions that produce violence. If we only excuse, we may abandon the victims of that violence. Wisdom requires both justice and diagnosis. When a worker sabotages another worker, we must ask, what did he do? But also, what kind of workplace rewards sabotage? When a citizen joins hateful politics, we must ask, what did he choose? But also, who taught him to fear his neighbor? When a family member turns against another, we must ask, what harm was done? But also, what secrets, comparisons, favoritism, and old wounds created this war? When a poor person attacks another poor person, we must ask, who committed the act? But also, who benefits when the poor fight each other? This is not weakness, it is deeper accountability, because shallow accountability punishes the visible mouse. Deep accountability examines the well, the bait, the farmer, and the mouse together. This is how real change begins. But the transformation of the mice does not happen only through hunger. It also happens through humiliation. Humiliation is one of the most underestimated forces in human behavior. A hungry person wants food, but a humiliated person wants restoration. Sometimes restoration becomes dignity. Sometimes it becomes revenge. When people feel unseen, mocked, ignored, or treated as disposable, they become vulnerable to anyone who gives them a story of superiority. This is why dangerous movements often speak to wounded pride. They say, you are not weak, you are chosen. You are not suffering because of complex systems. You are suffering because of them. You do not need healing, you need revenge. You do not need understanding, you need power. You do not need to question yourself. You need to punish the enemy. That message is intoxicating. It turns pain into identity. It turns humiliation into mission. It turns insecurity into aggression. And the person who accepts it begins to feel alive again. Not healed, alive. There is a difference. Healing makes a person more whole. Revenge only gives pain a direction. The farmer often prefers revenge to healing. A healed person is difficult to manipulate. A revenge-driven person is easy to aim. This is true in politics. It is true in workplaces. It is true in families. It is true online. It is true in communities wounded by history. A person who feels deeply humiliated may accept a false enemy more easily because the false enemy gives shape to the pain. But once again, Frankl matters. Frankl teaches that suffering does not automatically ennoble people. Pain alone does not make people wise. A person must interpret suffering carefully. Without meaning, suffering can become despair. With false meaning, suffering can become hatred. With deeper meaning, suffering can become moral strength. This is why stories matter. The story people are given about their pain can determine whether they become healers, rebels, servants, cynics, tyrants, or last mice. Tell a suffering person, your neighbor is the reason for your pain, and you may produce hatred. Tell a suffering person, your pain proves you are superior, and you may produce arrogance. Tell a suffering person, nothing matters, and you may produce despair. Tell a suffering person, your suffering can become responsibility, and you may produce dignity. The mice in the well have no narrator except hunger. Human beings do. We have stories, traditions, teachers, books, prophets, philosophers, elders, memories, and consciences. That means we are not helpless before the well. But we must choose our teachers carefully, because some teachers help us escape the well. Others teach us how to rule inside it. Machiavelli teaches us to understand power clearly. Sun Tzu teaches us that conflict is often won indirectly. Hobbes teaches us what fear can do when security collapses. Girard teaches us how rivalry and scapegoating consume communities. Orwell teaches us how systems direct hatred. Sherif teaches us how competition creates enemies and cooperation can reduce hostility. Frankl teaches us that even in suffering, the human being must guard the last freedom, the choice of what kind of person to become. Together, these writers help us understand the mice. They show us that the mice are not simply animals in a story. They are symbols of ordinary beings under extraordinary pressure. They are what people can become when fear replaces trust. They are what communities can become when scarcity replaces dignity. They are what citizens can become when propaganda replaces truth. They are what workers can become when institutions reward betrayal. They are what families can become when love becomes competition. They are what nations can become when leaders benefit from division. But they also remind us that transformation is not final. The last mouse is tragic because it carries the well into the field. But a human being can do something the mouse in the story cannot do. A human being can remember. A human being can reflect. A human being can repent. A human being can ask, what did the trap teach me? And do I want to continue obeying that lesson? This is one of the most important questions in life, because everyone has been shaped by some kind of well. Poverty, war, abuse, oppression, discrimination, violence, corruption, betrayal. Others are quieter: comparison, neglect, competition, shame, rejection, family pressure, social expectations, academic humiliation, workplace fear, online judgment. But every well teaches. The question is whether we will accept its lesson blindly. Did your well teach you never to trust? Question it. Did your well teach you that kindness is weakness? Question it. Did your well teach you that every successful person is your enemy? Question it. Did your well teach you that power means domination? Question it. Did your well teach you that survival requires betrayal? Question it. Did your well teach you to attack the person beside you instead of examining the structure around you? Question it. This is where freedom begins, not when the pressure disappears, but when consciousness returns. A person inside a trap becomes dangerous to the trap the moment he can say, I feel fear, but I will not let fear choose my enemy for me. I feel hunger, but I will not let hunger erase my humanity. I feel humiliation, but I will not turn my pain into cruelty. I feel anger, but I will ask who benefits from directing my anger here. I may be trapped, but I will not become the farmer's weapon. That is not easy. It may be one of the hardest forms of courage, because it is easier to fight than to understand. It is easier to blame than to examine. It is easier to hate than to grieve. It is easier to become hard than to remain human. But the goal of freedom is not merely to survive. The goal is to survive without surrendering the soul. This is why the mice matter. They show us the danger. They show us the transformation. They show us the cost of fear. They show us what happens when survival becomes the only law. But they also challenge us to become something more than creatures of reaction. We may not choose every well we fall into. We may not choose every pressure placed upon us. We may not choose every wound we receive. But we must fight for the freedom to choose what those wounds mean. Because if we do not choose the meaning of our suffering, someone else may choose it for us. The farmer may choose it. The crowd may choose it. The propagandist may choose it. The manipulator may choose it. The algorithm may choose it. The old trauma may choose it. And once they choose it, we may spend our lives fighting battles that were never truly ours. So before we condemn the mice, we must study them. Before we excuse the mice, we must hold them responsible. Before we call ourselves different, we must ask what our own wells have taught us. And before we celebrate survival, we must ask whether we have become more human or merely more dangerous. The story says only one mouse survived, but human beings do not have to accept that ending. We are capable of another possibility, not one survivor, but shared awakening, not the strongest mouse, but the conscious community, not victory inside the well, but escape from the logic of the well. That is the task before us, to understand the pressure, to expose the trap, to identify the farmer, to examine the mice, and then to ask the question that can change everything. What would happen if those trapped together stopped eating each other and started looking for a way out? Chapter 5. The ancient strategy. Long before the story of the mice in the well moved across the internet, rulers, generals, conquerors, and political thinkers already understood the principle behind it. They understood that people do not always need to be defeated by direct force. Sometimes they can be defeated by division. A united group is difficult to control. A divided group is easier to manage. A united enemy can resist. A divided enemy begins to weaken itself. A united people can ask questions. A divided people are too busy accusing one another. A united workforce can demand fairness. A divided workforce competes for approval. A united nation can hold leaders accountable. A divided nation becomes a battlefield of suspicion. This is the old wisdom of power. If you cannot defeat people as one body, break them into pieces, then rule the pieces. This is what has often been called divide and rule. The phrase is commonly linked to the Latin expression divide et impera, divide and command. Whether used in war, politics, empire, business, or family manipulation, the idea is simple. Keep others fragmented so they cannot combine their strength against you. The farmer in the parable does not fight 70 mice. He creates a condition where 70 mice become 70 separate survival machines. That is the genius of the strategy. The farmer's power is not in his muscles, it is in his arrangement. The ancient strategist understands that arrangement can be stronger than attack. A battlefield is not only where bodies fight, it is where perception is shaped. It is where fear is directed. It is where alliances are broken. It is where trust is poisoned. It is where the enemy's mind is weakened before the sword is raised. This is why Sun Tzu matters. In The Art of War, Sun Tzu is often remembered for the idea that the highest form of victory is to subdue the enemy without fighting. The wise general does not rush blindly into battle. He studies the enemy's plans, alliances, morale, confusion, and weaknesses. He knows that an army can collapse from within before it is defeated from outside. This is close to the logic of the farmer. The farmer does not need to chase every mouse across the field. He simply removes the conditions that allow them to behave normally. He changes the environment. He introduces scarcity. He creates panic. He waits for internal collapse. Sun Tzu teaches that the mind of the enemy is part of the battlefield. If the enemy trusts itself, if its allies remain loyal, if its people are clear, disciplined, and united, victory is harder. But if suspicion enters, if leaders doubt one another, if soldiers lose confidence, if allies turn cold, if hunger and fear spread through the camp, the enemy begins to spend its strength inward. A divided army fights two wars, one against the external enemy, another against itself. The second war is often more destructive than the first, because when people fight an external enemy, they may still know who they are. But when they fight each other, identity breaks, trust breaks, memory breaks, the sense of a common future breaks. Once that happens, the attacker may not need to do much. The work is already being done inside the camp. This principle appears not only in military thought, but also in political thought. Niccolò Machiavelli, writing in The Dangerous World of Italian City-States, understood power without romance. He studied rulers, republics, armies, ambition, fear, loyalty, betrayal, fortune, and force. He did not write like a preacher. He wrote like a man trying to describe how power actually behaves. Machiavelli is useful because he forces us to stop pretending that power always speaks in moral language. Sometimes power speaks beautifully in public and brutally in private. Sometimes power praises unity while secretly creating division. Sometimes power smiles while calculating who must be weakened. Sometimes power gives gifts not to help, but to bind. Sometimes power creates enemies not because enemies exist naturally, but because people are easier to organize when they are afraid. Machiavelli's world was full of rulers who had to manage factions. A city could be divided among noble families, merchants, soldiers, foreign allies, religious interests, and ordinary citizens. A ruler who allowed all these groups to unite against him was in danger. A ruler who could balance them, separate them, reward one, frighten another, and prevent common cause could survive. This is the political form of the well. The well is not always a hole in the ground. Sometimes it is a state divided into factions that fear one another more than they question the ruler. Sometimes it is a court where advisors compete for favor instead of telling the truth. Sometimes it is a workplace where departments blame each other while leadership avoids accountability. Sometimes it is a community where local groups compete for small privileges while the deeper structure remains unchanged. The ruler does not need everyone to love him. Sometimes he only needs them to distrust each other. That distrust becomes his security. Where there is no trust below, there is less danger above. This is one of the darkest lessons of divide and rule. Power can make itself necessary by making everyone else unsafe. A manipulative leader may create or exaggerate conflict, then present himself as the only person who can maintain order. He may say, "Without me, they will destroy you. Without me, your group will lose everything. Without me, your enemies will take over. Without me, chaos will return." But sometimes the chaos he claims to protect people from is the very chaos he has cultivated. First he divides, then he offers protection. First he spreads fear, then he sells himself as the shield. First he weakens trust, then he becomes the only trusted voice. This is the farmer standing above the well, pretending he alone understands the danger below. The ancient strategy also appears in empire. Empires often ruled over populations much larger than the ruling class itself. A small number of officials, soldiers, traders, and administrators could not govern huge territories by force alone. They needed local cooperation, they needed intermediaries, they needed classifications, they needed some groups to help govern others. So empire learned to divide. Not always by inventing differences from nothing. That would be too simple. Human communities already have languages, clans, kingdoms, religions, regions, professions, histories, and rivalries. But empire can take flexible differences and harden them. It can take ordinary identities and turn them into political weapons. It can take local leadership and make it dependent on imperial approval. It can reward one group, neglect another, and then act surprised when resentment grows. This is a very important point. Divide and rule does not always create difference. Often it reorganizes difference. It gives difference administrative power, it records it, ranks it, rewards it, militarizes it, educates one side differently, taxes one side differently, governs one side through another. Then over time, people begin to experience identity not simply as culture, but as competition. Who receives jobs, who gets land, who enters schools, who joins the army, who gets close to the ruler, who is called loyal, who is called backward, who is trusted, who is suspected. The imperial farmer does not need to tell every mouse to fight. He only needs to structure rewards so that the mice learn rivalry. This is why colonial history is so important for understanding modern division. Many post-colonial societies did not inherit clean political fields. They inherited wells already dug. Some inherited boundaries drawn without respect for older political realities. Some inherited ethnic categories hardened by administration. Some inherited systems of indirect rule. Some inherited local elites whose power came through colonial recognition. Some inherited uneven education and development. Some inherited security forces trained to serve rulers more than citizens. Some inherited economies designed for extraction, not dignity. When independence came, the farmer may have changed, but the well often remained. This is why we must be careful when discussing African, Asian, or Latin American societies today. It is too easy to say, these people are tribal. That statement is lazy. It ignores history. It ignores institutions. It ignores how identities were politicized. It ignores how competition for state power can turn cultural difference into fear. It ignores how leaders after independence also learned to use the same divisions for their own survival. A mature analysis does not blame culture alone. It asks, who made identity politically profitable? Who turned difference into a ladder to power? Who benefits when citizens vote through fear instead of judgment? Who benefits when public resources are distributed through loyalty instead of rights? Who benefits when people trust tribe more than institution? Who benefits when the nation becomes a well and politics becomes the pig? This brings us back to the ancient strategy. Divide and rule survives because it adapts. In one age it may wear a crown, in another a military uniform, in another a colonial office, in another a business suit, in another a party color, in another a media microphone, in another an algorithm, in another a family meeting. The costume changes, the method remains. Create competition, control information, reward loyalty over truth, make groups fear each other, prevent honest communication, present yourself as necessary. Keep the people below fighting horizontally so they never organize vertically. This is why the strategy is ancient but still modern. A manager may never read Machiavelli, but he may practice a small Machiavellian art when he praises one worker in front of another, only to create jealousy. A politician may never read Sun Tzu, but he may practice Sun Tzu's indirect warfare when he uses rumors to weaken rivals before confronting them. A family elder may never study empire, but he may practice divide and rule when he tells one child one story and another child a different story, keeping them dependent on him for truth. A social media platform may not be a farmer in the old sense, but if its systems reward anger, comparison, humiliation, and conflict, it can produce farmer-like effects. Modern power does not always need a single evil person. Sometimes the farmer is a structure. Sometimes the farmer is an incentive system. Sometimes the farmer is a market. Sometimes the farmer is an algorithm optimized for attention. Sometimes the farmer is a political culture that rewards division. Sometimes the farmer is a workplace model that calls fear performance. This is important because we should not reduce every problem to one villain. Sometimes there is a clear manipulator, but sometimes the trap is bigger than one person. A whole system can farm conflict. It can produce division even when no single individual wakes up each morning saying, "Today I will divide people." A society can be arranged so badly that rivalry becomes normal. An economy can be arranged so harshly that people begin treating each other as threats. A workplace can be arranged so competitively that kindness becomes irrational. A platform can be arranged so outrage spreads faster than truth. A school can be arranged so rank matters more than learning. A political system can be arranged so identity becomes more powerful than policy. In such cases, the farmer is not only a person, the farmer is the design. This is where ancient strategy meets modern life. In the old world, a ruler could divide nobles, tribes, armies, cities, or religious groups. In the modern world, division can be produced through data, media, incentives, fear campaigns, job markets, exam systems, political messaging, and digital platforms. The weapons have changed, but the target is still trust. Destroy trust and people become easier to control. Destroy trust between workers and they cannot bargain together. Destroy trust between citizens and they cannot demand accountability together. Destroy trust between communities and they cannot build a common nation. Destroy trust between family members and they cannot challenge manipulation together. Destroy trust between young people and they become competitors for crumbs instead of builders of a shared future. This is why trust is politically powerful. Trust is not softness. Trust is social strength. Trust allows people to share information. Trust allows people to coordinate. Trust allows people to risk cooperation. Trust allows people to say, "Your pain is connected to mine." Trust allows people to discover that the same hand that frightened one group also frightened another. Trust allows people to compare the lies they were told separately. Trust allows people to see the well. A divided people can be managed through rumors. A trusting people can test rumors. A divided people can be mobilized by fear. A trusting people can ask for evidence. A divided people accept enemies quickly. A trusting people ask who selected the enemy. A divided people compete for the farmer's rope. A trusting people may ask why they are in the well at all. This is why every divide and rule strategy must attack trust. It must tell people they are not like you. They want what is yours. They laugh at your suffering. They are secretly against you. They cannot be reasoned with. They are the reason you are trapped. They are the pig, and you must eat before they eat you. Once this story is believed, the rest becomes easy. The well no longer needs high walls. The walls now exist in imagination. People may live side by side and still inhabit different worlds. They may work in the same office and still suspect every gesture. They may attend the same school and still see each other only as rivals. They may worship God and still hate the neighbor God commanded them to love. They may speak of freedom while obeying a hatred planted by someone else. This is why the ancient strategy is not only political, it is spiritual. It attacks the human capacity to recognize another person as fully human. It teaches people to see others as categories, obstacles, threats, invaders, burdens, competitors, enemies, or food. Once that happens, cruelty becomes easier. And this is where every writer we have mentioned begins to connect. Sun Tzu shows the strategy of indirect defeat. Machiavelli shows the cold management of power and factions. Hobbes shows what fear does when trust collapses. Girard shows how rivalry and scapegoating consume communities. Orwell shows how hatred can be organized and redirected by power. Frankl shows that even under pressure, the human being must defend the inner freedom to choose a moral response. Together, they reveal the same danger from different angles. The human being can be made to fight the wrong battle. The enemy can be selected for him. His fear can be interpreted for him. His suffering can be given a false meaning. His loyalty can be attached to the person who benefits from his blindness. This is why education matters. Not education as certificate only. Education as awareness. Education as the ability to recognize manipulation. Education as the ability to ask historical questions. Education as the ability to separate emotion from evidence. Education as the ability to see when a conflict is being cultivated. Education as the ability to resist becoming a weapon. A person who understands divide and rule is harder to divide. A person who understands propaganda is harder to program. A person who understands scarcity is harder to turn against fellow sufferers. A person who understands scapegoating is slower to join a mob. A person who understands history is less likely to confuse inherited traps with natural destiny. A person who understands Frankl is less likely to surrender his inner freedom to the conditions around him. The ancient strategy depends on ignorance, not stupidity. Ignorance. There is a difference. A person can be intelligent and still ignorant of the game being played around him. A worker can be skilled and still manipulated by office politics. A graduate can be educated and still emotionally captured by propaganda. A religious person can be devout and still be used to hate. A poor person can be wise in many things and still be turned against another poor person. A rich person can be successful and still be trapped in rivalry. A leader can be powerful and still be afraid of unity below him. This is why the question is not, are we smart? The question is, do we understand the game? Because a game can be won by someone who understands the rules even if he is not stronger. The farmer is not stronger than all the mice combined. If 70 mice could think together, move together, and act together, the farmer's plan would be weaker. But the farmer does not fight them combined. He fights them separated. He wins by preventing the word "we" from forming. This is the final secret of the ancient strategy. It does not only divide bodies, it divides imagination. It makes people unable to imagine themselves as part of the same struggle. It makes them unable to say, we are all being underpaid, we are all being misled, we are all being used, we are all trapped by the same structure. We are all stronger together than we are separately. Once that imagination returns, the strategy begins to fail. That is why every farmer fears the birth of a true we. Not a false we built on hatred of another group. Not a tribal we built on fear. Not a political we built on propaganda. Not a corporate we used to hide exploitation. But a truthful we. A we that recognizes shared dignity. A we that can hold wrongdoers accountable without becoming blind instruments of hate. A we that can resist injustice without needing a scapegoat. A we that sees the trap and refuses to reproduce it. This is the beginning of escape. The ancient strategy says, divide them, and they will weaken themselves. The answer must be, understand the division, and we can begin to recover our strength. The ancient strategy says, make them fear each other. The answer must be, let us examine who benefits from that fear. The ancient strategy says, keep them fighting below. The answer must be, let us look up. The ancient strategy says, give them bait. The answer must be, let us study the well. The ancient strategy says, turn them into last mice. The answer must be, let us remain human. This chapter has taken us from the parable into history, from the well into strategy, from the farmer into the long tradition of power that understands division as a weapon. But strategy alone is not enough. To understand why divide and rule work so deeply, we must now enter the mind. We must study how fear, rivalry, resentment, humiliation, and imitation operate inside human beings. Because the farmer can build the well, but something inside the mice must respond to it. And that takes us to the next chapter, the psychology of rivalry.